Hi, I'm Alice Hoffmann, an indie artist from Austria. I had gotten into quite a rut with my YouTube channel and considered a longer hiatus. Instead though, I'd like to do something which I had been considering for a few years but never had the courage to do. I'm gonna tell you my life story. Not kidding. In the past, the stories of people's lives have given me hope, drive and a sense of being understood many times. I think for humanity there is more value in sharing many stories than keeping them a mystery. I find that you don't have to relate to someone's experience at all to get something out of it. Especially Saikra Yassin and Flavia have impacted me with their sincerity so much I can't possibly quantify it. The funny thing is, when I asked my coach how I'd know I'd be ready, he said there is no such thing as ready when it comes to this. I do, however, think the time is right, so let's go. I could start way back when I was a baby, but that would spoil an important plot point, believe it or not, so we'll save that for a bit later. Anyways, I was an odd child. I grew up in a quiet rural area house. We only had 2 neighboring houses with a fair bit of distance to them. Dreamy. Art always was at the top of my mind from very early on. I drew a ton of stick figures in kindergarten like a machine. One thing I mainly remember about kindergarten is not enjoying the other children. To me they were either boring, annoying or outright scary. And the kindergarten teacher seemed to be mad at me for not talking much. I really didn't understand why my parents put me in there in the first place, because I was behaving so nicely and I thought this was some sort of punishment. Yeah. Anyway, I just couldn't relate to people, so relationships were pretty frustrating as a child. Somehow I intuitively conditioned myself to obey unspoken orders, so I ended up quiet most of the time and quirky and energetic in more private settings. I was set up to spend a lot of time with a female cousin that was my age. I always hated her. She was bossy, whiny, cried a lot, she was intellectually unimpressive, always needed to be on top and have her mood pacified by everyone around her. She was a spoiled piece of shit basically. She was everything I knew I wouldn't want to be. But somehow I also knew that I was not allowed to openly tell that to the adults. I'd be punished harshly somehow. I told my mother many times, as she seemed like the one figure of trust, but I was expected to kinda suck it up and still befriend her basically. So I ended up feeling somewhat like this cousin servant, always making sure I'd kill my own thoughts and emotions while she was around. It's not even as if that little girl could have done anything to me. I was like those elephants that were taught learned helplessness. And it turned out that this would be a pattern that stayed with me for a while longer. I'm not an only child, by the way. When I was 4, I got a little brother and unfortunately I wasn't a good sister to him at all for the longest time because I was very jealous and thought he would replace me or something. Oh boy. There were a lot of good times too though. I hung out a lot in forests and had my peace. I discovered my love for cats very soon and had a few as pets, so that was just awesome. And as I mentioned in other videos, I loved Pokemon extremely to the point where I spent half my time in that world. In school, I liked the teachers more than the kids. You could say I was sort of a teacher's pet, in the sense that I was curious to learn all kinds of information, no matter the subject, except for religion. I deeply hated religion and didn't understand the logic in why people seemed to value it so much. I was of course lucky with my circumstances of birth, considering that no one hit me for that as far as I remember. However, my grandmother was incredibly intent on dragging me to church way more often than for example my little brother, which didn't help with my lack of enthusiasm. Go figure. I think my grandmother used me as a replacement therapist too, in a sense. Yes, it is absolutely awful that World War II happened, but she also didn't give a shit that I wasn't ready to hear that stuff. To me it was just anxiety inducing. I was like, I don't know, 6 or whatever. To be honest, I never liked my grandmother much. I just liked her cooking. But whatever, I had a subject at school where I stood out in a really good way and, you guessed it, art. I was so proud whenever I won a top spot in the yearly art contests. Every time, except for the last year of elementary school. The topic of that contest was friendship. By now I can analyze that my images subject was focused too much on zoo animals I was looking at. There were some people standing beside me. I guess you could say I was sort of a side friend to them. Yeah, and maybe friend is still a strong word in that context. I hung out with them sometimes because it's a small village, but we never really completely clicked. In that picture we were all seen from behind and had a fair bit of COVID-conforming distance between us. Well, the animals seemed way more interesting to me, at least as a subject, so I really didn't understand the appeal of friendship and found it to be oversold in media. Yet, with time I developed a yearning for something like that. I just found no one around me who made it seem as easy as those TV show friendships. Perhaps being overweight might have been a bonus factor for other children not vibing with me. I mean, I wasn't bullied heavily, but still not ideal. People. Well, all in all, I hope to find romance more than friendship anyway. It still seemed unrealistic though. I guess you could say my cats were my best friends for the longest time. So it probably isn't too hard to imagine that the first time I really cried about the death of someone I knew was the death of my cat. She was shot by a hunter and she dragged herself home and bled to death. I saw her suffering and apparently there was nothing we could do. I begged my parents to please go to some sort of vet and, have her stitched up and save her. But they said no, there is nothing we can do. And well, what else is there to say about the matter? You can probably imagine what I felt like. Anyway, life always goes on, and with the birth of my second sibling, I was a bit parentified by my parents. Yay! I was supposed to look after my second sibling and sort of raise them, so that was not a good idea, because I am not good with children, and I always knew I wouldn't want kids, and this just put the final additional bonus nails into the coffin. So all I can say about that is don't use your children to raise other children. It just doesn't work, you're just messing them up. Okay? It's more fun to laugh about things than to cry about them, so. My parents were loving and supportive, but they also were inconsistent and flat out incompetent. And I am not saying that to shit on them. I grew to love them now a lot more than I used to. And I can consider them as full people with flaws who do their best given the circumstances. But it still was difficult growing up with them because they both are addicted to legal drugs. So for my mother it was cigarettes, yelling and criticizing. She's an immigrant from Belarus. I heard people refer to parents who were born in ex-Soviet countries as Asian parents light, and I think that checks out, to be honest. With her it was quite an emotional whiplash sometimes. She could be happy and easygoing for a long time and be your best friend, and then when you accidentally piss her off or didn't do all your chores exactly right, then it's yelling time. Also, there's the classic, what, your grade is just a 1 minus, why not a 1 plus? A 1 is by the way the same as an A in other grading systems. My father is a well-meaning soul, but not equipped to build relationships with people who aren't his drinking buddies. He turned alcoholic in my tweens and for a long time it didn't get better for him. Gladly, which I do not take for granted, he is not a violent drunk, but still so annoying when drunk. And this is just a summary I'll give you. So oftentimes I felt more like a parent than him. And I don't even want to be a parent. With time, I learned to bottle up my anger and hold back tears until no one's around. Which is probably not healthy. And yet, I was stunningly resilient all in all, at least until my adolescence. I definitely have to thank art for that. It always was the one thing I could count on, even back when I didn't know what direction I wanted to take exactly. Thanks for sticking around. I hope it was relatable or interesting in some other way. I didn't want to make one long video, so I'll continue next week with another part. Have a great day. Bye.